Good morning. This video I'm going to review for exam 1. You can find the topic list for exam 1 in the week 2 folder. If I share my screen, I'm here on D2L. If I look in the week 2 folder, we begin with the intro to Python and Python basics. That was Monday's material. That will be on the exam. So be sure you watch those videos, go through those slides. I would recommend taking quiz 1. That's going to kind of give you a heads up about if there are some things you might need to clarify before the test. If you don't know it, it'd be better to figure that out on a quiz than to figure it out on a test, which is weighted a lot more. But you don't have to. It's not due until Sunday, but that would be my recommendation. I'm going to be right here. This is where we have the topic list, the review, and I'm going to be going through the items on that list. And then here is your exam. It does require lockdown browser and a webcam. You might want to just kind of test and make sure you have that available and compatible on your computer with enough time to reach out and get help if you need it. So, if you wait until 10 o'clock to start the test, and then you have technical difficulties, it's going to be hard for you to get any sort of help at 10 p.m., right? So try and just make sure that you can open it and that lockdown browser works and everything on your computer and you have access to a webcam and all that is good to go during the day where IT can help you. Reach out to me, or you could go use one of the computers at the school. So here in our topic list, this is material from last week. So you will have some questions over cloud storage. If you aren't sure about any of this, you could go back and watch the video over cloud storage in the week 1 folder. For Excel, there are some vocab questions. So you're going to want to make sure that you know the vocabulary. And then for the functions, you'll be asked to write a couple of functions. So make sure that you know what these functions do. And I covered this information in an Excel video that was posted last week, so you could go back and watch that video as well. One thing to remember whenever you do functions, don't forget that they start with equal signs. Don't forget that you use parentheses to show like the range of values that the function is being applied to. And don't forget that you use a colon in between the starting cell and the ending cell to indicate that it includes all cells in between them. So that's just kind of some syntax that you want to be sure you're mindful of. Min and max are pretty self-explanatory. They do, what they say. Sum is going to add all the values up. Average is the mean average. It will add them all up and divide by the number of items. Rand between will give you a random number in between the range of values that you give it, and that is inclusive. And then if says if the conditional is true, you do the first thing. If the conditional is false, you do the second thing and you separate them all with commas. So it's the conditional, comma, true, comma, false, which is very similar to the logical statements we're going to be doing in Python. So that's kind of a good little introduction to the ideas of logic and flow of control that we'll be using in programming as well. Base conversions, there was a rather long video on base conversions last week, but I covered all 3 of these. You will need to know how to go in between all of them. You do have those 2 quizzes that were practiced for this as well. So if there were things that you did not know on the quizzes and you want to kind of practice that a little bit more, please reach out. I can do a video, we can do some examples, but you will need to know how to go from binary to decimal and vice versa, from binary to hexadecimal and vice versa, from decimal to hexadecimal and vice versa. Okay, so what the kind of new material will be, this week's material, which will be from Monday, is going to be over Python. And there are quite a lot of Python questions on the exam. I guess I can kind of give you an overview of the test here. You have a 1-hour time limit. There are 9 written response questions where I could ask you to type an answer. I could ask you to write a formula. I could ask you to write a Python statement, like a line of code in Python, something that you type in yourself for your response. And then there are 15 multiple choice questions. the multiple choice questions can be auto graded. So when you finish the exam and it tells you your grade, if it's really low, don't panic because they can't auto grade the written response questions. So it's probably going to mark all of those as wrong, but you didn't actually miss them. I just have to go in and grade it by hand. So if you take your test and the grade looks low, don't panic. Those can't be auto graded. So I'll have to go back in and I'll add those points in. And so we have the topic list here of stuff. I'm about to go through it. And then one thing that I did want to mention and make sure everyone is aware of, in the 9 written response questions, there is one pretty big part. It's worth 8 points of the test. It's a big question. It asks you to write a Python program. Like you are going to have to write a complete program. And if all you have done so far is just watch those 2 videos that I posted yesterday and you have not written any code yourself, I don't think you're going to have enough practice to really feel comfortable with that question. So please go on Replit or whatever editor you prefer and practice solving just some really simple problems. Make a really basic calculator. Do program 1. That one's really simple. It asks for someone's name and it asks you to calculate an age based on their birth year. So just very simple. The program that you're asked to write for exam 1 will be very simple, but I'm saying that you want to have at least a little bit of experience writing things out yourself, and you'll feel more confident with it whenever you see that question. Also, there's a note on the exam, but just, I'll say it to be clear as well. Really emphasize, you can get partial credit on that question. So even if you maybe don't feel like you understand all of it exactly right, still answer the question. Don't leave it blank. Go ahead and, write down something because you can still get points for just making an attempt. Okay, so I'm going to go through the topic list now and we'll talk about these things a little bit. And then I am going to write a simple program here in this video just to give you a little bit more, just another example of writing in Python and doing a little bit more just like simple programs. Okay, I talked about comments yesterday. Remember that you use a hashtag to make a comment and that it is ignored by the computer. It's something that we write to make our code more readable for the programmer. It's for the human user. It doesn't get translated at all. The computer doesn't do anything with those instructions. In order to print something out in Python, we use the command print, and then we have parentheses around everything that we want to be printed. Anything that is inside quotation marks will get printed exactly as it appears. We can also print multiple things in one statement if we join them together with a plus sign. So that's called concatenation. So I could print like some literal words, and then I could print some value that was inside of a variable, and then I could print more, literal words at the end of it if I wanted to, as long as I have plus signs joining them together. We mentioned yesterday how different information is stored as different data types. And what you can do with the data is going to depend on what kind of information it is, what its data type is as it's stored. An int is a whole number that is short for integer. A float is a number with a decimal part. And a string can be a single letter, a word, a sentence. A string can be anything as long as we use quotation marks around it. To read in input from the user, you use the command input. And then in parentheses, you're going to say, what do you want to be displayed on the screen? If you don't have any display at all, if you don't prompt the user in any way, they don't know that the computer is sitting there waiting for them to type something in. If you don't display out a prompt, the computer is just going to look like it's frozen. It'll look like, it's just like a blank screen. It's just going to be sitting there because it's waiting for the user input, but the user doesn't know that. So they don't know they're supposed to be typing anything in. So you, in the parentheses, you can have your quotation marks and you say, you need to tell them, let them know, what do you want them to enter, print out a prompt. And then you can read in their answer and you can store it inside a variable, and that will always be stored as a string. So remember that input is always read in as a string, and sometimes we need to convert it to an integer or a float so we can do some sort of math with it, or something that we can only really do with numbers, not with words. And the way you cast it is going to be by writing the data type name and then parentheses, and anything that you want to try and cast would go inside the parentheses. We talked about this in the video, in Monday's video, and you can go back and watch that video for really good examples and a little more in-depth explanations of all of these concepts. Remember that the equal sign is really the assignment operator. It says take whatever is on the right, store it in the destination on the left. Order does matter. You cannot switch those two things. So like x equals 7 is fine. Take a 7 and store it in x. 7 equals x is invalid and would throw an error. This is something that I didn't talk about as much, so I'll go through an example of that in my video that I write here in a second. But you can actually combine the assignment operator, the equal sign, with some of the mathematical operators. So if I wanted to take a value that was stored in a variable and add some number to it, and then save that result back into the variable, I could do something called the assign, the combined assignment operator. I can say, do the math and also store the answer back into this destination. And I'll do an example of that when we write our program in just a second. Make sure you know the mathematical operators. I went through this in the Python basics video. This allows you to add, subtract, divide. This is integer division, multiplication modulus, and this is going to be exponent. Remember, your order of operations is going to be PEMDAS. And you can go back and see that video if you aren't sure about what some of these operators do. A Bool data type is going to evaluate to true or false. And we have our operators and, or not, which we can combine to make Boolean expressions. So true and true. For and to be true, they have to both be true. Anything else, an and is going to return false, right? So like true and false, nope, had to have both of them. False and true, nope, had to have both of them. So the only way and is true is for two truths. For or to be true, you need one, at least one, but it's okay if they're both true. So like true or false, yep, I had at least one. False or true, yep, I had at least one. True or true, yes, I had at least one. It's okay that they were both true, that's fine. And the logical operator not is just going to negate whatever response you gave it. So not false, you flip it, it becomes true. Not true, you flip it, it becomes false. We also talked about these conditional operators in the Python basics video. Because we use a single equal sign as an assignment operator, if I want to actually check for equality, I need two equal signs to do that. And then the exclamation mark is going to be not. So this would be not equal to. So are these two things equivalent? Are these two things not equivalent? And you could watch that video for some more examples of that. So we are going to make a little Python program, and I will be very careful and mindful that I use an example of the combined assignment operator. So here's what we're going to do. And that's it. That'll be all of our topics that we've covered. So we are going to make a calculator that will tell us the price, how much the total bill would be to buy tickets to go to this park. So this is the Manuel Antonio Park is in Costa Rica. I'm going to be visiting there later in the summer, and we're planning on going to this park. So we have here the price for a ticket for an adult and the price for a ticket for a child. Also, if a child is 0 to 2, it's free. their ticket is free, and there is an 8% tax. So we are going to write a program that is going to allow a user to enter in whoever is going to be entering the park, whoever needs tickets, and it's going to tell us the total price, the total bill that they would have to pay to go on this tour. Okay, so let's think about what all our program would need to do this. Anytime you write a program, you don't start just like jumping straight into the code. You kind of need to plan out what you're doing a little bit, kind of determine what steps it would take to solve your problem, what types of information you need to store, what variables you would need to create, what kind of information you're going to need in as input from the user, what kind of formulas you would need to calculate your end result. You kind of want to make sure that you have everything sort of planned out, and then you'll have a clearer picture in your head of what you're trying to do. So some of the information that we would need to know: how many adults are in the party that are 13 and above. We would need to know how many children are in the party that are 3 to 12. We don't necessarily need to know, but you know what? Yeah, we will, because it's a maximum of 10 per guide. So you couldn't bring along like 37 one-year-olds. So we will go ahead and ask how many children they have that are 0 to 2. We won't charge for them, but we have to make sure that we only have 10 people for our guide. We don't need to ask the user we don't need any input from them to calculate the tax. We already know what the tax is, so we don't need that as information from them. We will just have to do the math. We'll have to do the formula to add that in ourselves. So once we know how many adults, we can multiply that by 60. Once we know how many children, we can multiply that by 40. We won't necessarily need to add anything for the children here, but we'll still know the number of them. And then we would need to add these two together to get our total cost. And we would have to calculate the tax for that total cost. So I would need to multiply that by the 8%. So 0.08 to convert the percent to a decimal. And I'd have to add that to their total bill. So then we would have our total costs, and we can print that result out to the user. It doesn't really do us any good for the computer to calculate the answer and for it to know the result unless we print that information back out and the user is able to see the answer. Also, we wouldn't be able to test and know if we got it right. So here in Replit, I am going to create, hit that blue button up there. I'm going to create a new Python program. And I'm going to call this exam 1 review. That's what we're doing here. We're reviewing for the test. And really good programmer practice would be to kind of have a heading up at the top, just sort of saying what's going on here. So I'm going to use a hashtag to make a comment. And I can have, that my name is Micah Morgan, and the course is CMPS 1023. And I could just say like the description, this program will calculate the total cost of tickets to Manuel Antonio National Park, based on the number of travelers. Sure, why not? Okay. So let's think about some of the input that we said we needed from the user, some of the information we need to make our program work. We said that we would need to know the number of adults, right? We need to know the number of adults, so we can multiply it by 60, and the number of children, and the number of infants. So let's go ahead and get that information from our users. Remember, the command to get information is input. And inside of this command, I'm going to tell them the prompt that will be printed out on the screen. So enter the number of adults, and we'll go ahead and let them know. I think it said that an adult is 13 and up. Okay, and that's really kind of an inconvenient place for that tab to be. Maybe I should kind of move that over, but yes, an adult is going to be considered 13 and above. So let's say we'll go ahead and let them know that is 13 plus. So if we say enter the number of adults, okay, and this is going to read in the response and it's going to store it in a variable. So we need to create a variable to store it in. So I'm going to say number, so like NO for number, that kind of looks like it's just saying no. So we'll just say NU for number. Number of adults. And I want to be able to do math with this, right? I'm going to have to multiply the number by 60. So as mentioned several times yesterday, I'm going to want to cast that as an int so that I can do math with it in a little bit. Now I'm just going to, because I'm a little bit lazy and I like to be efficient, I'm just going to copy and paste. Now we want to know the number of children. So we'll just create a new variable for that. And instead of saying enter the number of adults, we will say enter the number of children. And that's going to be 3 to 12, right? Because if they're 2 years old, they're free. Let's see if we can, I've just got to move this whole thing. Yeah, 3 to 12 is going to be considered a child. So, whoops, needed this. Okay, perfect. And once again, we're going to read in the input and we're going to store it as a number so we can do some math with it. That's fantastic. And then I'll paste it one more time. And this will be the number of, and we'll say infants. So enter the number of infants. And that's going to be 0 through 2. Okay. So what we were doing here, and I'm going to make a comment to myself because I like to try and describe what's going on in the code. What we're doing here is get the user information for the number of travelers. Okay. And then we want to do our math, right? We want to calculate. So let's say calculate the cost per age group. Okay, so my my total cost, I'm going to go ahead and break it up into a couple of different operations. I'm going to get my total cost for the adults, my total cost for the children. I don't need to find a total cost for infants because they're free. And then I'm going to add those numbers together to get my total. So let's call this the total for the adults is going to be the number of adults times 60. One thing I'm going to stop and make a note of here. Notice that I wasn't, even though I have like multiple words here, I'm not allowed to have a space in between them. It needs to all be one word. So if I want to try to represent multiple words, I'm using an underscore to separate them. Something that some other people will do, it's called camel case. They'll just like capitalize whenever there's a new word. So either way you want to do that is fine. Okay, so we're going to say the total for all the children is going to be the number of children times 40. And again, we don't have to do anything to calculate the cost for the infants because there is no cost for the infants. So then I personally would like to call this cost for the adults and cost for the child. So then I can have a cost total. The total cost would be how much did you pay for the adults? How much were we charging for them? Plus, how much did we charge for the children, right? We are going to have the total cost for all the adults stored inside this variable. We are going to have the total cost for all the children stored inside this variable. And there's no reason for me to make these line up. I just personally kind of like it when they line up. So if you were wondering why I just put an extra space right there, it didn't do anything, for the program. I just kind of like it when things line up, that's all. So if we have the answers stored in those variables, adding them together will give us our total cost. However, here's where I can show you the, yay, okay, good. Here's where I can show you the combined assignment operator, because this total cost is not including our tax. So what we really want is to take this amount and multiply it by our tax, right? Multiplying by 1 will give us that total, whatever we had before. Multiplying by 1 returns itself. Multiplying by 0.08 is going to give us the 8% tax. Having both of them together will give us our previous total plus the 8% tax. Oh, good. I'm glad I was able to have an example of that in the program. Okay. So calculate the cost per age group. Calculate the total cost. And then finally, I want to print out the answer because it doesn't do us any good for the computer to know the answer. We want the user to know the answer. So we will say, we can just use the print command, and I'm going to use that plus sign to kind of join. I'm going to concatenate a result with the value that was stored inside this variable. So we will say your total cost is, and I'm going to have a dollar sign, and then I'm going to say cost. If we were wanting to make this a little bit fancier, and something that we will do once you have a little bit more programming experience and we've kind of written some more code in this class, we could go through and make an if statement that would go through and double check. It did tell us that you're only allowed to have 2 to 10 people. So we could use some if statements to go in and we could add up the total number of travelers. So, I could add up the number of adults, children, and infants, and I could make sure that that total was between 2 to 10 people. And if it was not, we could, print out and tell them like, you have the wrong number of travelers, either, not enough or too many or whatever. But this is a great little simple program. So we found out how many people were in each group. We multiplied it by the cost for each group. We added those together to get a total, and then we added on the tax. There was an 8% tax on top of it. And then we print out the final result. So I'm happy with this. Let's run it and test it. Enter the number of adults. So me and my husband, and then my oldest son is going to be over 13. So we will say 3. And then the number of children would be 2. And then the number of infants, none. And then, oh, right, of course. What a good point here. Whenever we're printing things out, when I try to concatenate this, it needs to be a string, right? And we saw that in the video yesterday, and I already forgot again. So here we have cost total. It's being stored as a number, but in order to print it out, Python wants it to be a string. So we can actually just cast it. We saw casting in the video yesterday. I could say, I want you to take this information and I want you to force the data type to be a string just for this one little, use, this one little time that I want you to do that. So let's try that one more time. So the number of adults, and this is kind of right in the way, so I'm gonna move that. Number of adults is 3. The number of children is 2. We do not have any infants. $280 to go on that tour. Man, I hope it's going to be a good tour. So let me stop sharing that because that's going to cover all the information for exam 1. It will be available from just the whole day. It'll open up that morning. It'll be open, until midnight that night. There's lockdown browser and a webcam required. I would suggest going through that topic statement and letting me know if you have any questions. Make sure that you can write some Excel formulas and make sure that you could write some simple Python statements. Get on Replit and practice doing just some really easy, add some numbers together, divide some numbers together. Make sure you practice, the modulus operator and integer division. Make sure you know what those do. And I think that's everything. I think we've covered everything that you need to know for the test. I wish you all good luck. I think you're going to do great. And please, please, please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you would like to meet and go through any examples. I would be happy to do that. See you tomorrow.